talking about generations of women in women's ministry. It's important for us to know differences in how generations develop and different characteristics of these generations so that we know the perspectives that the ladies in these generations are coming from as we learn how to work together in women's ministry. We're in a unique time where we're just on the verge of having 4 different generations in the workforce, as well as 5 different generations of adult women in women's ministry. So our oldest generation would be the builder generation, and those were ladies who were born before 1946. Some characteristics you may want to know about this generation is that they would tend to prefer symphonies to rock concerts. They tend to watch more plays than pick up basketball games, and they have their heroes for that generation are people like FDR and Winston Churchill, Babe Ruth, and Joe DiMaggio. They were born during this period of the Great Depression, and they lived through that and World War II. So they saw a lot of change in their early life, just as the other generations have. But for this generation, it deeply, deeply impacted them in the sense that a lot of times they have fear of shortages because of the things that they went through. They have a strong work ethic. They respect authority, and they tend to be self-sacrificing. As far as their communication style, they prefer formal or written type of communication. And then next you have the boomer generation. Those are ladies who were born between about 1946 to about 1964. Some things you might want to know about this generation is that they are known for enjoying work. They invented the 60-hour work week. They're passionately concerned about participating in causes, and they have a passionate spirit. They never met a problem they couldn't work through, and their heroes are people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. and the Kennedys. Other things to know about boomers are that they were the first generation really to begin questioning authority, whereas their parents' generation typically completely accepted authority and were used to autocratic type leadership. This generation began to question authority. They preferred a more democratic leadership style, and they prefer in-person communication. This generation also is retiring later in life than their predecessors, so many of them are still in the workforce. However, those who are retiring are really wanting to find causes and places where they can invest their time in volunteering and where they can be useful in their retirement years and make a difference. Some things to know about the Buster generation are also known as Generation X. This generation was born basically between about 1964 to about 1982. Some researchers differ as to when this generation ends and the millennials begin, but we'll say about 1982. Some things to know about them are that they are very resourceful, that they're very clever, and they're very adept and sometimes even a little edgy. They work to live, not live to work, whereas the boomer generation really focused on work and they live to work. The Buster generation said, you know, we're going to learn how to work smarter and faster, and they want to be able to have more of a work-life balance, so they work to live. They're comfortable with change. They've grown up with change and they're used to it. In general, they're not influenced by a lot of heroes. They're also self-reliant. They were the first generation of latchkey kids. They tend to be skeptical of authority, and they expect equality in leadership. Whereas the boomer generation preferred a democratic style leadership, they were still accustomed to having someone who is in charge but would listen to their opinions. With the Buster generation, they expect there to be an equal playing field for leadership, that everyone is on the same level. And this generation prefers email communication. Then you have the Bridger generation, also known as the millennials. In this generation, they begin about the year 1983 to about 2000. Some researchers say cap it at about 96 to 98, but really it's in general 1982 to about 2000. So the Bridger generation, or the millennials, they're very confident, they're very achievement oriented, they have a lot of technical know-how, they are smart and clever. They're the healthiest generation that we have seen thus far. They're the most civic-minded and very optimistic. And heroes for this generation tend to be people like Bill Gates, and the New York City firefighters after 9/11, and the American women's soccer team. Some other things you may want to know about the Bridgers are that they're good at multitasking. They're entrepreneurial, they're very goal-oriented, and they prefer text or social media communication. They are also very public on social media, as they were one of the first generations to really begin using social media. They enjoy a public platform with social media. And then waiting in the wings, we have Generation Z, and the oldest of that generation will very soon be young adults entering the workforce and joining in your adult women's ministry. So some things you may want to know about Generation Z. This is the generation that was born about 2000 and after. They're accustomed to cultural diversity. They have a short attention span because they're so used to multitasking. That's just a normal part of life for them. They are accustomed to using multiple platforms of media. They're speed communicators. They prefer communicating through images such as emojis, live streaming, and using multiple platforms at one time. They prefer social media communication. However, we're learning that they tend to be a little more private on social media than their predecessors in the millennial generation. They prefer using forms of social media that such as Snapchat and different modes like that you can delete the message later on. However, as I always caution, things on social media are not as private as they seem because everything's always stored on a server, but to that generation, they prefer it to be a little bit more private message. Another thing to know about Generation Z is that they're very practical about choosing a career path as they are entering college. They lived during the time, they grew up during the post-2009 Great Recession, so they want to choose a little bit more secure career path. And they're entrepreneurial as well, like the millennial generation. And they have a very collaborative leadership style. As they are accustomed to diversity and equality, they want to, again, have a leadership style where everyone has a voice and everyone is kind of on an equal playing field. So it's really important that we know the differences in these generations. Again, each individual lady is unique and your church culture is unique, so you have to take that into consideration as well. But you do need to know some general characteristics of these generations to help women come together and serve together with one another in women's ministry. It's important to know these leadership styles and communication styles because you may have ladies in the builder generation who really want that written communication, or boomers who think that you need the in-person communication, where you're also working with millennials and Generation Z who prefer the text or the social media communication. You have to find ways to build bridges with those generations and the leadership style. Right now, our millennial generation is really ready to take their place in leadership. And if you are one of the members of that generation, I would encourage you just to be patient and look for opportunities where you can serve and you can take leadership roles. And then if you're in one of the generations prior to that, if you're a buster or a boomer or even in the builder generation, I would encourage you to really allow the millennial young women to begin to take on those leadership roles and give them opportunities to serve in leadership. And then, of course, as I said, Generation Z is coming right behind them, and very soon they will be joining our women's ministry as well. So you want to continue to find ways to help build up those ladies. These are just some ideas for you to know about serving together among multiple generations of women.